Okay, also, we're going to talk about normal mapping now. And, normal mapping is one of those things that can kind of be a pain in the ass in a lot of times. So I'm going to try and hopefully give you guys some stuff that'll make it a little easier to kind of deal with. So we're going to start off with kind of one of those things that suck in general with normal mapping. We're going to start with a cylinder. Now, this is important to talk about because there's a bunch of different methodologies for dealing with normal maps. Let's see, edge faces. Here we go. And one of the hardest things to deal with dealing with normal maps in is typically these kind of surfaces where you're going to be dealing with um, we're going to be dealing with 90-degree edges on surfaces. Okay, so typically what I will do is I will derive my low res cage from my high res mesh typically. If it's a simple object such as this, I will build using the stack editor inside of Max. I will build on top of the base silhouette. Now this cylinder has way more sides than what you would typically need to do. The reason for that, and I'll give you guys examples, it's going to help reduce some of the banding on the asset, and in the end we'll end up removing some of these edges. So I'm going to drop an edit poly modifier on top of this guy, and we're just going to do some basic subdivisional modeling on top of this. You don't need to even do subdivisional modeling. You can do stuff inside the ZBrush or whatever you want. We're not going to go super crazy on the normal map talk because we do so much normal mapping in the demos and stuff that I don't think I need to go over a ton of stuff. But if I miss stuff and you guys still have questions, please shoot me an email. The core thing to remember about your normal maps is there's a few things that really are really important. A, your UVs. B, the shell that exists for the actual asset needs to encompass the mesh. Okay, so basically your high-res mesh has a bunch of detail. Your low-res cage either needs to have the ability to have the detail projected onto it or encompass all of that detail. Basically, think of it as a capsule that sits around the asset. Now, some things also to remember is that with a normal map, you do not need to have geometry that is welded into the surface of the asset. We can use floating geometry, okay? And so we will do that right now. I have got to tell you, man, it is super frustrating with how much Camtasia is causing my computer to lag when it's running. It's really frustrating. But, whatever. Let's get it, knock it out. Okay. And some other things to remember with normal maps. We have the normal maps, the UVs, the smoothing groups, and also, and particularly for hard surface stuff, your cage is really important. And I'm going to show you guys all of that real quick here, okay? We're not going to go crazy on this asset, obviously. I'm just giving stuff that is typically the stuff that can kind of cause problems with normal maps. Maybe we don't go that high so I don't have to rebuild a low-res cage too much. Here we go. Okay, so we have this. I'm going to export this guy out. Export selected. Send him out as an OBJ. And still HR. It's fine. It's going to go through and export it. Nice. And again, since we're using the stack options, I can just go back in and remove all of that. Now, we probably want to keep this just so I understand what is what. I'm just going to turn him off. Isolate this. Okay, now we're going to go super low res and just project this down onto a simple cylinder. So I could, obviously add more detail to follow the silhouette better. I'm choosing not to do that for the sake of this demo. And some things to talk about inside of Max, of course, we have our default cylinder. I'm just going to go through really quickly and weld. Control W will do the weld. The other thing, too, to check out, so let's look at this guy really quick. Let's look at the checker pattern on him. Okay. Let's go ahead and let's relax him. Okay. Tools, we'll rescale this. So all the clusters are within their same 0 to 1 space, and they're all relatively within the same domain, and they're all equilaterally used. Okay, let's come into here. I'm going to go to my downloads folder here, if I can find it. I'm going to type in text tools. There it is. Okay, quick install. Oops. Quick install. There we go. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do is, this is text tools, TEX tools. Very useful tool for you Max guys. There's a bunch of things that we can use in here, but the first thing that we're going to use, and this is the only thing I'm going to show you guys with this tool, is we're going to do smoothing groups from UV shells. Okay. And what that does is that's literally going to break the shell. Okay. It's going to basically give a separate smoothing group on these edges. Okay. That's part one. So let's just export this and look at this and see how this looks. We're going to use null. Drink my coffee as this is loading. Control B. So null obviously can take in, you can load in height maps, normal maps, but we also has a baker. Control B is going to load the baker. We're going to go into the desktop and we're going to select our high res mesh and select our low res mesh. Okay. We also have a cage input. We'll talk about that a little later. And we're just going to do pre-process, okay, because we add all and then we get the option to pre-process. And let's just look at what's happening here really quick. Okay, so we have some black spots on the mesh. We have some areas where we're obviously basically missing. So let's look at the actual high-res mesh here so we can see what's happening. So we have the surface mesh here, right? And if I toggle this, you can see the high to low. Now, if I turn this on, this view cage, null makes a cage based off the low-res mesh. So if I push this guy out, it now encompasses more of this mesh. This is one of the reasons why you have to have a cage. You're basically telling it the ray search distance. There's another reason why you need a cage, and we'll show you that in just a few. If I hit rebake, we can see all of that goes on. Since the UVs are relaxed, we're pretty solid in that regard. Okay. Now, let's talk about something here. If you notice, let me just turn off the high res. Okay. So we're in a pretty good spot. Okay. You notice that we don't really have too much banding. Let's check the normal map around these edges. We don't have too many banding or striations because we have enough edges on the silhouette to help reduce any of it. You can see a little bit of it happening at glancing angles. It's super minor though. Okay. Now with normal maps in general, we're going to pop back into Max after I export all of this. Set this up as targets just so they're easier to process in Max. Just because we're going to be running everything via the viewport. And for those of you who are wondering why I'm not on 2017, I refuse to jump to an Autodesk product until after they release at least one service pack because they won't fix their shit otherwise. So, yep, I've been burned from it, so to hell with them. We're going to go in here, normal bump, bitmap. We're going to pull that bitmap up. We're just going to find that normal map, okay? Really quick, customize. If you go under rendering here, there is this gamma and LUT setup. By default, if you are doing a lot of pre-rendering, you'll probably have this enable gamma LUT correction. Turn that off if you're looking at normal maps in here, okay? It'll F them up, okay? You don't want that. Now let's go ahead and look at this. Hold this little icon over, go all the way down up to the right, turn that on, and then drop this bad boy on. Okay. Now, if you are authoring in a different program, depending on what you're doing, depending on what your max settings are, you may need to flip your normal map, okay? So let's look at that. Typically, it's the green channel that you need to flip, and we'll see this hopefully pop in an update. Come on, update. Of course, you're not going to update. Okay, well, this should be updating, but it's not updating, which is so weird. Turn that on, okay. well, my computer's being weird, so let me just drop a light on here really quick to verify something. Standard Omni. Come under here, under realistic, so you can see the lighting. Yeah, it's the issue right now is that my computer is lagging so bad um, because of the issues with Camtasia. Damn it. Okay, if this isn't the, damn it, dude, this is so stupid. I cannot believe this is not working. This is really irritating me. Hmm. If this was flipped, it would be pretty apparent. I can't actually tell right now because of the way Max is being. But so we have all of these extra faces in here that we talked about previously. So let's look at those really quick. Okay, now I'm going to show you guys something. You have to be careful doing this, okay? Because what we're essentially doing is we're altering the underlying mesh, which can really screw up that the normals off the surface. Removing these edges isn't that big of a problem, okay? So as you can see, we just did that and it was fine. Okay, and that's a little bit more optimal. We don't have as much banding. So that's kind of what you would do to work around with the cylinders. You would kind of add more and then remove. Be careful though, okay? Like with all things, there's like a million caveats. If I start altering this, let me just see if I can mess this up to a point where the normals and stuff will start to screw up. Well, that'll obviously screw it up because the UVs are all messed up. But you can, if you start like altering the surfaces and start deleting stuff, yeah, you'll start to get some really weird surfacing. Okay, obviously this is some bad geometry that I was creating, so just keep that in mind. Try not to alter the surface unless you're just reducing stuff. Okay, so that's the cylinder workflow. Moving right along, let's talk a little bit about floaters now. I am going to actually refer you guys to another artist. Hold on. So Alex over here, if you go to this guy's Gumroad here, he's got this really awesome tutorial on kind of advanced tiling techniques, but he also has this little demo on trim sheets as well. Okay, and this is really common in games. Okay, and for you guys who are interested in this and you're coming over from a pre-rendered background, because I got a lot of people who, you know, enjoy my stuff from the pre-rendered side, but they're like, oh, he does games. What the hell's up with that? So they come over and check this out. Traditional subdivisional modeling would have you guys go through, and I'll just do this really fast, would have you go through and kind of cut everything into the surface really fast, like to make it kind of airtight, right? We all know that. That's pretty standard workflows. Games don't need us to do that, okay? Especially for normal map data, and this is a very old school normal map data or normal map baking trick. This is one of the reasons why games is one of the ways game artists are able to do a lot of crazy content really fast, is because the content isn't actually all sealed in and shut. And there's a lot of benefits to not doing this as well. It makes asset reuse much easier. Basically, all I'm doing is I'm going to just use one mesh here just to save time. But as you can see here, this mesh sits flat into the surface, okay? This mesh has an outer trim that kind of sits flush on the surface, and from pretty much most angles, short of 90 degrees to the surface, you wouldn't be able to tell that this thing's floating, okay? And the reason why we do that is so that we can build out a number of different interesting things. We can build out trim sheets. We can do all kinds of cool stuff with it. But it allows us to project a lot of high-res detail on a surface really quickly without having to do a ton of work. And you can even have them intersecting, okay? As long as you don't necessarily see the projection issues, then you're probably going to be fine, okay? The intersecting issues, I should say. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these guys. I'm just going to export this out. And I want to show you guys some things, because if you're looking at this and you're like, well, that's cool, you can project surfaces, but how do you rip an AO map? I'll show you one of the ways. There's a few ways to do this. This is the way that I do it. Export selected here. And of course, because my naming conventions are always so rock solid. And again, the UV is by default inside of max. This UV plane is going to be inside of 0 to 1. Okay. I should relax it, but I'm not going to do that for this. Doesn't really matter for this demo. Okay, again, Control B. Nulled is still a kind of a program that's a little bit in flux, so every time you see me shut it down or do that kind of thing, it's just to clear the browser cache and clear nulled cache files and stuff like that, so I can add new assets in. All right, Control B. It's pulling those high-res data. I believe I said 1 was the high-res, and I think 2 is the low-res. Pre-process this. Okay, look at that. It's flawless. Now, again, remember what we showed just a few seconds ago. We have the high-res, and now we have to look at the cage. Okay, I'm going to push that cage right on up. Okay, you don't want to go crazy far with your cage, okay, because basically what happens is off of every surface, and I'll demonstrate this inside of Max in a second, there are normals or vectors that shoot off a vertice or a face or an edge, depending on what your display units are, depending on what the engines, or depending on what your ripper's calculated at. And if they go too far, the farther away those lines get, the more they're going to warp. Okay, just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's just turn that off. Let's look at the low poly. Okay, so there's our low poly. Okay, now let's walk through this really quick. Now, right now for this guy, the AO ripped totally fine. And if we want to adjust our AO settings, by the way, in each of these tabs, there's different things that you can control. And under main is kind of where you would go in and control all of that. So we can add more samples onto the raycast for the AO. It's pretty quick. I'm recording, and this is shooting through pretty fast, so it's pretty quick. Let me show you guys the normal map after this thing's done, because I janked the settings through the roof. Okay, there's our normal map. Now, there are some instances where you have a bunch of floaters, especially if they're inverted or they're flipping, different ways to get different curvatures or, indents or that kind of stuff. You can get some really weird AO seams, okay, particularly on the underlying geometry, especially depending how far off the surface the geometry actually is. So you can do a couple things. If you are super concerned about having unique AO, like perfect AO, it becomes a little bit more difficult. If you're more worried about just having kind of the impression of AO and kind of worried about just more or less worried about having the the gradations and the surface detail, you can do this. And this is what I do a lot of. I'll select the folder, export that guy out, shut down nulled again, open nulled back up, come under here, File, Load Normal Map, or Derivative Map, and I'm just going to load the normal map for right now. Okay. So we have our height information, we have our normal, and we also have our AO. Okay. And this will allow you to do quite a bit with it. Okay. You can obviously scale things and push things pretty crazy, but you can bake pretty cheap AO really fast, just going in and using the normal map. And you can use that in conjunction with a master AO rip, which would be what we first ripped with. And you can paint out areas of geometry that you would want to overlay in Photoshop. Okay, pretty straightforward, and it works really well. It works really well, and it's really nice. Okay, so to recap, let's go back into the normal mapping stuff. Normal maps in UV islands. Let's talk about that. We're going to use our handy dandy ultimate demo box.